Hello, my name is Cindy Gay, and today's video is going to be about choosing a pattern either as a beginner yourself or for a beginner that you're getting started, right? There's a certain criteria that I found that if you follow it, that beginner will have a better than average chance of sticking with it. And that's what we want to do anyways, right? So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Cindy Gay. I teach traditional rug hooking, and my mission is to help rug hookers find their perfect rug. And I do that through online courses, online lessons like this here on YouTube, and in workshops in my studio. If you want more information, you can go to cindygayrughooking.com, and all the information that you need will be there. So let me, I was on a roll until that happened. There we go. And that's not what I want either. Hold on for just a minute. See, that's the trouble with me running a little bit late. I didn't have time to double check all this stuff. Oops. There we go. So let's get started about beginner patterns. Okay, so the first instinct is to keep them simple, but I have a caveat about simple. They can be so simple that they become difficult to make interesting. So for instance, if you had a giant circle like this, and let's say 3 giant circles on the rug, okay, maybe not your cup of tea as far as a pattern goes, but to make that area interesting is going to be really tough, at least for a beginner. Because beginners think one area on the rug, one wool, which is not necessarily true, right? You can create your own patterns inside of patterns. You can use multiple wools to hook the same thing. It's something that I do all the time. And my little purse here that I usually hold up is missing because it's in my tote bag, but that's okay. I can show you this instead. So this would be an example of me using a bunch of different wools to hook red. So if I had an area on a rug that I wanted to hook red, this is what I would hook. And you get all this interesting stuff going on. Now they're not all red. There's a little bit of orange, there's pink, there's brown, there's a lot of different stuff in there. And the more you keep things clean, meaning you either do all of one kind of red, or you do all of one value, or you do just one wool, the more boring it becomes. So you want to mess it up, make it a little bit dirty, and bring in stuff from all over. Mix up textures, mix in some solids, just get a little wild with it, and it'll be more interesting in the long run. One thing that is universal for a beginner pattern is to keep it small. Okay, you don't want to pick a 20 by 30 rug, which is a smallish rug hooking size, but for a beginner that can be overwhelming. Let's keep it down to something about this size, and I'll show you more about this in a minute. But what that does is when it's small, it can be hooked in a week. This can actually be hooked in a day if someone's really on it, and then they can move on to finishing. And they get the entire experience in a very short amount of time. And then it's like, yes, I like this process. Let's move on. Let's do something else with that, okay? So let me switch to the down camera. Oh, I forgot. Hold on. I got to open a piece of software real quick to make these colors a little bit better. No, it didn't improve it much, but okay. So this is, I use this as a coaster. Okay, so there's my handy dandy thermos sitting on it. It makes a great coaster. This is a 6-inch by 6-inch piece. I call this the beginner square. Okay, this is going to be, I think I have some instructions somewhere on the internet for this, and I will gather those and put it inside the rug hooking journey. but I think there's some older existing instructions for this. The user is going to need about 2.5 ounces or a pile of wool about that big. Just a nice little pile of worms about that big. And that'll be enough to hook this completely. I use multiple cut sizes. I use multiple colors. I do all kinds of different things with it. The multiple cut sizes might make some of your lines a little wavy, but I actually like it better when that happens. If you want to get a little bit more organized with it, here's this one. That one is more set up like a log cabin. And so you need a certain amount of these colors and a certain amount of other colors. And as you can see, I didn't follow it perfectly. I wanted it messed up a little bit. I probably started with this one and I thought, okay, that's going to be really boring if I do it perfectly for all the rest of them. So I messed it up a little bit. Okay. And this is only partially done because I use this as a teaching sample on how to do this particular finish. So that's why it's that way. This one is a small piece that I actually made for my husband to go on a box he was making, and he never finished the box. So I haven't finished this, but what I do is I save this for when I'm demonstrating with students, and then if they have questions about whipping, I use this for whipping. And of course, by now I've given at least 4 lessons on the corners because the corners are all done. But something simple like this would be a great beginner piece. Now, this is a little fancy in that, and I don't think it's perfectly, in fact, it might be upside down. Was upside down. I wish I had changed the value. I wish I had been a little bit braver with the change in value. There is a number 2 here. And I wanted that to be there, but not be there. So, but it's more not there than there. Does that make sense? So that's what's going on with that. But that could be something that a beginner could handle, you know, maybe without the 2 on the background, because then it's just a mixture of reds, a mixture of whites, and a couple of blue stars. So I tell you what, on this one, if you like this pattern, send me an email and agree to allow me to put you on my email list. And and I will send you back this pattern as a PDF that you can print out. Okay. So we're talking about small, we're talking about small so that you can get it done. The person who's hooking it has to be passionate about the subject matter. So you cannot successfully, in my opinion, give a pattern with a turtle on it to a beginner who has no connection to turtles. They're going to have no, you're better off doing, just the little beginner square. They're more likely to get that done. So make sure, if it is one of your old patterns and they're not interested in the subject matter, flip it over and hook on the other side. Okay? That works perfectly good. The beginner can draw their own. If you don't draw well, bonus. Okay? If you don't draw well, you'll make better primitive patterns than someone who can draw well. Okay? And believe me, that not drawing well and not having the training for drawing can be a huge advantage if you like a primitive look. So don't discount your ability to draw a pattern. What you're thinking about is something simple like a coloring book type thing. But you don't want to take a page out of a coloring book, because even something that simple and that innocent is covered by the copyright laws. So don't do that. Draw your own. If you draw your own, you will 100% always be in the right. Okay? That's the biggest way you do it. I talked about making, if it's If it's too simple, it can be hard to make interesting. Now, how do you know if that it's a pattern that you can hook? Well, what you do is you take the cut size that you want to use and you lay it on the pattern. If this will fit inside the pattern that you're hooking, then you know you can cut it with this hook size. That you can hook it with this cut size, okay? If this is covering up 2 or 3 different areas, then you know that this cut size is too big. Stick with, for beginners, I like to stick with a number 6. A number 6 gives them the look of the big chunky loops, but it's easier to pull up. Okay, so avoid advising a beginner in the direction of 8s, 8.5s, and 9s, okay, because they're going to struggle with it. They don't have the technique yet to get that up, okay? As far as backing goes, I would strongly recommend, even if you personally use monk's cloth, steer the beginner away from monk's cloth. Monk's cloth is the hardest backing to work with because it has a 2x2 weave. And if you get your hook right there in the center, it's really tough to get that loop up. So give the beginner a break. If you have to, use burlap. But I would recommend rugwarp or linen for beginners. In my studio, I start beginners on rugwarp because one of the problems that beginners often have is when they pull up a loop, it pulls out the prior loop. Well, there's technique to get around that, but rugwarp is going to hold that loop a little bit harder, and it's going to happen less often with rugwarp than it does with other backings. You can also hook very familiar, simple shapes, such as, this is what I was working on today. I didn't get very much done because I was talking and enjoying the scenery around me and not hooking the way I should have. But this is going to be a pencil pouch cover. And one thing that I point out, if you're hooking a pencil pouch, I initially forgot to leave a margin for the whipped edge. So I had to go back and sort of realign this so that when I do the whipped edge, it won't be too big for the pencil pouch. But this is what I'm working on, but it's really simple. It's black outlines. It's a blue spot dye for the background, and these flowers are going to be done very simply. Okay. Another tip, we were discussing this today at the little gathering that we had, and I thought one of the best tips that I had, that I received that I had never thought about recommending is don't do a seasonal rug for your first piece. And I think mainly for that, it's mental, because if you're hooking, say, a Christmas rug, and by Christmas you're not done, are you really motivated on December 26th to get that done? Okay? Where if you're hooking something like this, doesn't matter what the date on the calendar is. Okay? This is still something you want to get done. So steer them away from the seasonal things. Use textures in your hooking. Textures will hide your hooking technique. Okay, you don't need to be able to be a technician and hook it as perfectly using textures as you do with solids. Solids are like, here I am, everything is shown, and it can be a little bit more difficult to get that look if it's something that, if the person wants that perfect loop look. Steer them away from solids. And we talked about the cut size. I do recommend a number 6 for people getting started. So let's take a look at secondary supply. There we go. Let's take a look at the my suggestions for what's coming up for beginner patterns. Okay, my friend Kim has a website and she has a lot of small, quick, simple, easy patterns that really will get you started. Now, some of these are seasonal, so it's like anything in rug cooking. You have to decide when to break the rules, if what I said was rules, and they're really not. They're just suggestions. So if you love pumpkins and that person who's hooking it loves October and it's spring, by all means, hook that rug. It's just that if it's September or early October, maybe that's not the best thing unless you know this person is someone who can really get things done. And I know Kim is working on a second line of these. These are what she designed, but there'll be multiple Januaries, multiple Februaries. So you can pick and choose which one that you want to hook on. And they all have various different levels. This one for February would be very suitable for a beginner. And it could also make a nice coaster. It's a little bit bigger. This one is 6 by 6. These patterns are 8 by 8, so they're a little bit bigger. In addition to that, Kim has a line of what she's calling dewormer patterns. And the whole idea of these is that you use a pile of your cut strips and you hook it. But if you don't have cut strips and you want some variation, like for instance, this one here that's hooked, she's used her, I think it's grasshopper swatch and then a turquoise swatch. And all you would have to do is order one of each of those and you can hook this entire pattern. So there are ways to get variation without putting out a huge amount of money in wool, and that's one way. Another source would be on my website. These are my stair risers. Here it shows it shows them in place. If you don't have stairs, this particular one got away from me. It says simplify, but I did the wrong finish on it and it made it bigger and it didn't fit on our stairs. It fits on the stairs in my new home, luckily, but I improvised and it became a wall hanging just below the mirror, just above the toilet. So I saw it every day. It reminded me to keep things simple. So those stair riser patterns are all here. They're only 6 inches by 30 inches. What's great is that you can hook them up fairly quickly. They can also be kitted up fairly quickly. You can get in touch with me for availability on that if it's something that you want to do. And right now, that's about all I have the bandwidth for our stair riser patterns. Okay, when you get a pattern, one thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to check the outside edge of that pattern. And this is an article, and I found it by simply going to my website, cindygayrugcooking.com, and typing right there in the search box, I typed in straight line. And this walks you through the process of doing a straight line. It doesn't have a video there yet. There is a video somewhere on YouTube about this, but I'm working on pulling those resources together and putting them inside the rug cooking journey. So I can't remember if that one's already reunited or not, but for the public, this is where you can find how to draw a straight line. You do not want to use a ruler on your fabric. The reason you don't want to use a ruler is because the ruler is straight, but the fabric is not. So you want to draw it in the ditch, and then there's a process that you go through to straighten it out. And that's just one of those things that we go through. I lost my train of thought on that. Bear with me. Oh, and a final tip. Choose colors that you're comfortable with. So if you don't have anything in your home that is orange and you don't like the color orange, don't hook an orange pumpkin. You can still hook a pumpkin because they come in green, they come in white, kind of a gray. So there's other things that you can do. Don't take the most obvious choice, but make sure as a beginner that those colors mean something to you. Okay, and that is the biggest way to do that. Let me scan really quick to see if there's any questions about our topic. I'm looking for question marks. Okay, so that's it. Doesn't look like there's any questions on this particular topic. Thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next time for the next lesson.